all, how's everybody doing today? I mean, I'm just kidding. I absolutely cannot stand when people like try and get you all riled up. You kind of just want to sit there and you want to enjoy the talk. So it's going to be one of those laid-back kind of conversations. But anyway, so there was a lot of back and forth on what I was going to talk about, and I kind of moved towards what the talk that I've always wanted to give to developers in Alaska. And so I called it Why I Love Coding. But really what this talk should be about is why I love coding, why you should love coding, but really how that applies to living in Alaska and what makes us unique as programmers in Alaska. So first of all, I'm extremely excited about ArcticCon. This has been a dream of mine for a really long time, and seeing someone else do all the work just makes it that much better for me. So it's absolutely fantastic to see you all here today. Anyway, so let's jump right in. My goal today, so like I said, I want to make everybody feel good about coding. And specifically, I want to make everybody feel good about coding in Alaska. So I'm not going to make you jump up out of your chair. I'm just going to use words to get you all hyped up about how great a profession it actually is. So I want to talk to you about three things today. There's really three main points. The first, I kind of named it pretty simple, is why I really love coding. Why I got into the business, why I absolutely love every minute of it. Second of all, I want to talk, we really like to code. So I work with a group called Alaska Dev, which is a meetup group. And we've got over 300 members. And so I really kind of want to talk about what the members of Alaska Dev, what they do in Alaska, how they make the profession, and what they're really looking for in the state. And then finally, I want to talk about what we're actually doing in Alaska, why we stay here, and how this applies to the future of not just Alaska, but the future of ourselves living in Alaska. So let me jump right in. Why I like to code. Now this is actually a... What's going on here? Oh well. Looks like we're jumping around. Sorry about this one moment. We'll just do a refresh, that'll fix it. Okay, so we got a little preview of what's going on here. There we go. So, part one, I really like to code. And so I'm sure everybody has their own reason why they got into the business, why tech attracted them, or why they got into computers programming, whether it started out with the Raspberry Pi or whether it started out with making a website on the internet. But really there's three fundamental reasons why I absolutely love it. And it actually took me quite a while to come up with a way to really articulate this. But there's three parts. Actually, the one really, it pays the bills. There's really not much explanation for that, and for everyone here, that is a really important component, and that is something that we need to focus on in this talk. But number two is actually really interesting, and this is the, if anyone can place this movie quote, shit, I think I gave it away in the next slide, but if anyone can place this movie quote, when we think about programmers, we don't typically think about programmers or developers as as people-oriented people. And that's kind of a stereotype that's not true and getting less and less true as tech is moving on. So for instance, a really good way of putting this is that we connect with people in a very personal way, and that's becoming much more and more personal, not just through working on devices and cell phones and that sort of thing, but kind of the emphasis more on user interfaces and user flexibility. And so then we need to understand people, how they work, how they think. It's becoming more and more personal with that. And so even as you move all the way across the tech stack, you're seeing those levels of considerations. And so that really, I always love taking that into consideration. But more importantly, it's how we help people. And that really appeals to me as well. So I work as a developer for 3 Beluga for a programming company here in Alaska. And the best part of my job is when I think about how you kind of with the follow through with the individual clients, what the individual people are going to look like that are using the software. And that's not just for the public facing websites, but we look at the back end as well. We put a lot of attention into laying out kind of the forms that direct the content management. And the really nice thing about that is when I go to work, when I work with my clients, they'll actually, well, their employees don't hate me, which is, to me, is a kind of a mark of pride for that sort of thing. But even extending beyond that into the the romantic aspects of it, what you're creating devices that help people go about their lives, and so that's a very people-oriented approach. But then finally, this is kind of my my favorite, is that it really is a base level of expression. When we're writing software for people, we're creating this kind of the manner by which people communicate with one another. You're kind of controlling, you're not necessarily controlling that, but you're developing a means by which people communicate, and that kind of deep connection really appeals to me. So for those connecting people is really important. But what is probably more important, and what I think is really relevant to Alaskans here today, is, and I just wanted to include this, so that's the the engineer, the typical engineer who says, I work with people, damn it. And so that's really not what programmers are anymore. But what I want to talk about finally, the third reason why I love coding, is it's the ultimate expression of self-reliance. And this is where it really comes in Alaska. A lot of the developers I've met and I've talked to have really shown that by living in Alaska, you can not only, you can live anywhere in the world, but you live up here. But more importantly, you can work for anybody, and you can have any customers anywhere in the world. So you can connect with people or you can choose not to. But most importantly, the idea of scalability. If you create a business, one single person can create a multi-million-dollar business that can have tens of million dollars of revenue, and they can just live in a cabin up in Alaska, or they can just be a small team that's based in Anchorage. The idea of scalability is extremely powerful in software, and it's really what really drives me. And so those are kind of the reasons why this is why I was attracted to software. But something I wanted to do in this presentation is, at the end of each section, I wanted to ask you guys a question as well. Kind of self-reliance is my dog. He's the epitome of that. He just takes on the world. But the question is, what made you become a programmer? And I think that everybody should kind of reflect on that a little bit. And I started doing that lately, kind of looking back on what drives me. But more importantly, asking other people as well, like, why did you get into this? And what if you could choose as a programmer, if you could choose what you're doing, where does that take you? And I think that's a really important thought to have, especially moving on as Alaskans. But so the second part I really want to talk about is what I call We Really Like to Code, and that's the meetup group that we created. If anyone here isn't familiar with Meetup, meetup.com is just a simple site where you can create a small group of people. You can all agree to meet at a certain time at a certain place, and you can either discuss this particular topic, or for instance, there's hiking meetups in Anchorage that are fantastic that'll get up to 10, 20 people going on a hike at the same time. So meetup.com is a fantastic platform, and that originally started with the intention of getting coding meetups together, getting developers of similar interests together in a room, talking, working, developing, teaching, that sort of thing. And so in that respect, it's a fantastic platform. So we started Alaska Dev in December of 2014, and so now we're up to 334 members. We were founded in 2014. We're up to 34 meetups right now, and so we've kind of evolved who we are, and that's what I want to talk about as well, is the fact that over these 34 meetups, we've had so many different types of people come in with different needs, and it's like kind of what we've done has evolved tremendously and given us a lot of kind of insight into what Alaskans as developers want. And so so this is this is the section that I've been dying to create. This is stereotyping our members, not in the sense that we have different types of members, I've noticed, and they all fit into 4 distinct categories. And I've noticed that kind of reflects developers in Alaska as well. So of course we have the first one, the no-show. This guy is awful. He'll RSVP and he won't show up. We really don't know anything about him, of course. But and we have the career coders. So these are the 2 main types of experienced coders. We have some who have a career, they might work for RDI, for Pango North, for the state, that sort of thing. They have a job and they're happy with it. But what they want to do is they still want to develop their coding skills. They still want to work with others. They want to connect with people in that sense. But they kind of differ from the other category of developer that we've seen as well, and that is the entrepreneur. And so the entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily innovate in the sense of business, but they're driven in code by creating things that are fundamentally new, that are of thin air. And so what I've noticed with the group is that it's been fantastic having that balance of both, just because the go-between has been phenomenal in terms of making sure that, excuse me, back up for a second. Anyway, it's been phenomenal having both, just because it kind of creates a dynamic that's a lot more interesting. But those are generally the 2 fundamental types of programmers. And of course, finally, we have the beginner. And I left this person for last because it's absolutely great connecting with beginners in these types of meetup groups, because not only do you get to provide a service to them, and of course you make friends in the process, but they're very active explaining code to people, kind of even at lower level or even at higher level. It really causes you to kind of revisit and reinforce what you understand about developing yourself. But I think even more importantly, kind of reaching back to the beginning, when you ask yourself, how did I get into programming? What motivates me? And that's something you got to ask yourself, when you're starting to code a lot. And I think that revisiting people who are just getting started, it really brings back the passion. And so that's what we've seen fundamentally with these, with these different meetup groups, is we have these people that come together. But that doesn't really. I think the best part of it is kind of the dynamic and how that all came about. So first of all, the difficult part in creating the meetup group and in kind of creating these communities is I think it's especially unique to Alaska, because I think a lot of us, my observation has been that a lot of us have this kind of pioneer mentality. That is to say, everybody wants to start over, they want to do everything for themselves, they want to create the first thing in Alaska, and there's kind of that mindset that you have very predominantly, not just amongst meetup groups, of which there were quite a few in the beginning, but also extending beyond that in terms of starting a business. It's very easy to become the first of anything in Alaska. It's very easy to create, even if you're just creating software stacks or something like that. You're special when you're up here. And it's been a really positive thing for the most part. It creates a lot of energy. But at the same time, whenever you're trying to put together communities like this, we become more siloed, I think, than most other regions. And so I've talked to a lot of developers who have started meetups, for instance, in San Francisco and Nebraska. I think San Francisco probably takes a close second, but some of the other communities like New York, you kind of get that coalescing amongst the different people. And in Alaska, I've found that's been actually quite difficult. But I'd say that eventually, like I said, over the past few years, as we've put together these different events, we've kind of found a really good balance that attracts people. And that's kind of the final thing I want to talk about with regards to this meetup group is that we have people, sometimes we have 20, 30 people showing up. It's really hard finding out what to do. And so as an organizer, you're constantly, your main concern is making sure that you get your attendance high. Partly just because you want to make, you want that legitimacy, but more importantly, you're booking a room with, 12-person minimum or a 20-person minimum, so it's very important that you get enough people showing up that you're not caught with the, with the minimum tab. So in that regard, so we kind of had a lot of back and forth in terms of, well, if not enough people showed up, we kind of revisit the drawing board and reevaluate. And so we kind of came up with 4 different types of events that we do. So the first is probably the most important, what you'd expect, is the training. And I think that's been really helpful for developers in Alaska, is just having that working together. And so there's 2 types of that. The first we have is we did a few Python classes where we taught people who would, who would come and had no programming experience. We got them started on the Python track. And that was actually a really fantastic way to make friends. We got a lot of new members out of that. But the other aspect of that is just doing those, just working together on different tasks. And so one of the, there's a fantastic program we're doing right now where you go by and they do interview questions. We work through the interview questions together, get our unit tests at the end, and we compare how we all did. Fantastic thing about that is that we have different, we're working in different languages, so that some people might be working in Python, some people might be working in Node, but we all we're working on the same problem as well, and so we can kind of compare. And it's really accelerated the learning process for things that you wouldn't normally start doing. Second of all, we have developer presentations, which I think is probably the best part. And that's where you take something that you're passionate about, you're really into, and you pitch to a room full of other developers, and you basically get torn apart. And so that's something we do as well. But again, sometimes, and so the important takeaway is that a lot of these work for some people, they don't work for others, and you'll see that the group kind of evolves depending on what we're doing. Finally, what's really important is we have an online interaction component. So we've been working a lot with Slack. We have a lot of members that are talking and getting engaged on Slack. We're asking questions, that sort of thing. And that's been extremely beneficial. And then finally, this is probably the most important part of the group, is that a lot of our developers are working freelance. And actually, I'll talk about that in a minute, what our developers actually do. But when they're working freelance, when you're working at home, like I do a lot of the time, it's really nice to get out there, not just to meet somebody, but that's doing the same thing as you, and to sit down and have a beer with them. It's a fantastic, it's been a fantastic program. So, so like I said, we had a wide variety of meetups. In fact, this one, I just picked this one, as significant just because the guy in the back was visiting from Australia. He came up and he'd never been here before, so he was up here for a week. He came to the meetup, he talked about, I think he was a specialist in, he was doing React for Adobe, he worked for Adobe. And so he came, he talked, he did his little presentation, we hung out, and then afterwards we ended up climbing flat top. So that's kind of the, and I think that was probably one of the more popular events that we've put on. But really fundamentally, the kind of the why of this, the biggest thing that I gained from this is learning what all the other people in Alaska do. And so that's probably been the most valuable. And so what really surprised me is how many people up here, I mean, first and foremost, there's people that do something that have the same interests as you, that do these types of things, that you're just, you're blown away that somebody does something, somebody in a state as small as this does the same thing that you do, that somebody's interested in the same things, and you're like, oh my God, a real person that you can talk to. But more importantly, what really surprised me is how well, I'll say how highly functioning, but how successful people are, programmers up here that actually just freelance. And so that's been the biggest takeaway, is that there are programmers up here who are extremely successful who don't really get out, they don't go to a company and interact, they freelance, sometimes with local clients like I do, but others will actually, they'll have clients all over the world. And so it's really great, not just hearing how they, it's been great hearing not just how they work, but that they're making it, but the kind of the techniques that they have, and it's really a lot easier to learn that, kind of with that one-on-one level. And so, of course, we have those developers, and then, like I said, we do have we have career developers as well. They come up here, they work for the state of Alaska. They might work for petro companies. And so, in that regard, it's kind of great for them as well to get out and kind of push a lot of them are working the same stack to get out and kind of push their interests and then bring that back to the company. But it's been really surprising how many programmers there are in Alaska and how much, kind of how diverse and how much we find to talk about. So the second question I wanted to ask, the first one being why you became a programmer, or what motivates you rather to be interested in tech if you're not one. The second question I would ask is what you would want out of a meetup group. And so that's something that I'd really like to hear from you regarding. And so in this case, it's not just in terms of if you're a developer and you want, kind of those values, that solidarity or that training, but even if you're an industry stakeholder, it's been, that's one of the limitations that we've run into, is that it's very incredibly difficult to bridge that gap between, stakeholders, not just in terms of businesses, but just in terms of people who working for nonprofits, or even opportunities in Lower 48, bridging those opportunities with the developers up here. And so that's really something that we really need more feedback on, how we can provide that sort of thing. So part 3. So this is the part that I really wanted to talk about, and this is what we're actually doing in Alaska and how this actually relates, how this compares to working as a developer in Cincinnati, working as a developer in Cedar Rapids or something like that. I don't want to use the word, compare too much to San Francisco, just because that's so far in the clouds and out of here that it's a little bit different. But again, so I talked about the developers, how we actually work up here. We have those freelancers that are telecommuting, but we also have all those different types of developers that are kind of working together, and the fact that they're succeeding is really encouraging. But unfortunately, a lot of them, there's a lot of transiency up here as well, and so that's kind of what I've gotten, through talking to our members, is anecdotally why people are leaving and why people are staying. And the why we stay is actually the most interesting for me, because usually most developers I talk to have offers for higher paying jobs elsewhere in the country, and that's just a fact that it's actually really fun. If you go to the Census Bureau, you can see the NAICS codes for different states, and you can compare them. I think Alaska usually takes, second to last place or third to last place in terms of developer income in the country, which I find really fascinating. So it's not the money that's keeping people here, it's the lifestyle. And so I think that's something that's not just appealing in terms of getting developers to stay, but attracting more developers up here. But the question also is, and I've had a lot of friends and a lot of developers that have left the state, and so asking them why they've actually left, and I mean 9 times out of 9 it's been that there's been a better paying salary elsewhere, or occasionally there's family concerns, but generally people are leaving for better salary. And so the effect of this is we have this trade-off between how much people love Alaska and whether they want a better salary. And so that really, what we believe firmly is that shouldn't be, that tension shouldn't exist, that trade-off shouldn't exist. You should be able to stay up here and have more success in Alaska. And so that's really the ultimate question that, the ultimate goal that we created the group for, was creating creating a better Alaska for developers. And so, so again, the question is, how can programmers make Alaska better? And so really we've actually done a lot of conversation with this, not just with the developers, but with industry stakeholders. And there's really two aspects of Alaska that I think people can get really excited about as a developer, beyond just, beyond going to work or beyond being beyond going to work, beyond freelancing. There's really, and even beyond coming to a meetup group and having a burger with us. I think that what really motivates Alaskans, the potential to really get excited about Alaska, the first is actually rural outreach. And so this has always been an issue, but it's becoming more and more relevant, for instance, with the development of infrastructure. So we have, so for instance, GCI's Terra project has been up for a few years in Quintillion, is laying down fiber for remote communities. And so that, already alone, these communities are getting broadband internet that in some cases might be faster than a lot of the places in Anchorage. More importantly, throughout Alaska, you have a very strong culture of sharing, and I think that kind of drives that opportunity as well beyond other regions. And then finally, there's this opportunity to follow through, and this is what I think is the most important. So kind of the main ask here is I'm asking that people kind of go out and volunteer with Rural Cap or with other these programs that are kind of doing code outreach, and this is a really great way to get excited about it. So this opportunity to follow through. A lot of these communities, they're used to programs coming through. For instance, we might buy Raspberry Pis for a community. We might develop infrastructure. We might put up computers. But there's really no follow through, even in terms of teaching somebody to code. There's that necessary follow through, reaching back to our developers of if you are in Willow, Alaska, or if you are in Shishmaref, or if you are in Barrow, what it actually means to profit off of code. And I think that's a fundamental missing step that a lot of Alaskans can gain a lot from, and that's something that we really want to focus on. And so in this sense, that follow through would include the developers I talk to who, some of them work for companies and have opportunities within Alaska, but some of them also have clients throughout the world. And so kind of teaching people how to find those contracts, how to win those contracts, how to deliver on those contracts, and finally how to get paid. I think that's been missing from just about every program that I've seen, and I think that's something that our group has a lot of potential to further. And that's something that developers have a lot of potential to further as well. And so in that respect, if you look back to what you do and this, the skill set you have, sometimes it's the little things that become extremely valuable in terms of outreach. And then, do we have one more? We don't. So that's something that's been, I think that's something that's missing in Alaska. And then most importantly, it's an opportunity where you can have tremendous impact with very, very little input. And I think that's something that's very motivating. So the second reason why you should be excited to be a developer in Alaska, and this is really the big one, is startups. So startups, I'll go my presentation remote. So I'm not sure how many people know this, but there is a tremendous amount of deployable capital in Alaska. The fact is that we have more money than we have businesses to invest in, and that might surprise a lot of people. What might surprise people even more is that I can't name. So we have, actually, this is our first cohort where we have tech companies that are actually being invested in, but prior to this, very few tech companies have seen any of that investment money, which I think is very surprising for a couple of reasons. The first one being that tech is extremely scalable, and that's kind of reaching back to what I said about why tech is the fundamental self-reliance. It's scalable. One single person or one single state can create something so dramatic that millions of people can use a product. And it doesn't have to be the next Facebook, but there are a ton of examples that come out of places, communities like Boise or Cedar Rapids, or even smaller communities like that put out these startups. And so in that sense, you really have that scalability that really, at the very least, it doesn't lend us any disadvantages. But more importantly, why I think it's surprising is that, excuse me for a moment. Turn my page here. Perfect. Oh, right. Anyway, so the second, the fact that there's so much deployable capital is that, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, so, oh, right, these are advantages to creating a business in Alaska. I think the second advantage lies in the fact that it's extremely marketable up here, in the sense that we have a very self-contained community of 700,000 people where it's trivially cheap to market a product to get people to adopt your product. There's that sense of ownership. But extending beyond that, you have your own microcosm community of all these different stakeholders, where if you were to launch a tech product in, say, San Francisco, if you were to launch a tech product in Seattle, the effort of cornering a market would be so extraordinarily extravagant that businesses are fighting here tooth and nail just for market share. Something done in Alaska, if you become the first person, you are the only one, and everybody jumps on you. And so in that sense, I think that tech has a really strong advantage in that sense. But anyway, so finally, so reaching back to my first point is that it's absolutely crazy how much deployable capital there's up here. And so the quote I heard, there's over 20 million, and it's actually growing every single day as more and more of these investors are signing on. So we have groups like, for instance, we have the Alaska Investor Network. We have 49 State Angel Fund was originally a $13 million grant from the federal government to be matched by the private sector. So they're sitting on capital. And we also have the Alaska Opportunity Fund, the Alaska Accelerator Fund, the Alaska Fund, and the Alaska Business Plan Competition of Arctic Innovations. But most importantly, I'm sure this is going to come up more often throughout the talks today. There's a program called Launch Alaska. I think intently one of their cohorts is presenting at one of the sessions today. I highly recommend you go to that. And so intently, to my knowledge, is the first fully tech-focused startup that's kind of in the scalable internet sense that's launching in Alaska, and so that's extremely exciting. But the bottom line is there's a tremendous amount of deployable capital, and then extending upon that, there's a lot of stakeholders within Alaska with tremendous amounts of experience that really want to see these things through. So the amount of advice and feedback and support you get in this type of thing is completely unrivaled. Certainly not by San Francisco, certainly not by by Seattle or New York. And so in that sense, we have a really strong advantage. But I think, so reaching back though to the beginning, I think that the biggest advantage that Alaskans have, and I know everybody's used to hearing this about how pioneering, how self-reliant we are, but there really is that confidence that we have up here that I think is, it's just the biggest strength that we have, that everybody up here believes that they can start, they can start a program, they can start a meetup group, they can do these things. And in some cases, we're competing with one another, we're siloing each other off. But I think once we get beyond that, that hurdle, I think that as Alaskans, we really have that drive that I think could really see some of these, these tech startups, these programming startups, actually have a really good chance, not just in Alaska, but in scaling elsewhere. And so, kind of to bring it all together, and so finally, I wanted to finish this section with another question as well: is what would an Alaska tech startup look like? And so, I've heard a lot of specific ideas, but kind of reaching back to the strengths and weaknesses of Alaska. That's something that I think has really been missing from the conversation, especially from a tech standpoint, is not just what strengths we have up here, but what opportunities are created by those strengths, and then equally what our weaknesses are, having that pessimistic talk of, well, the fact that it's 4.5 hours to fly to the closest regional hub, that there really are a lot of disadvantages. And so kind of, when, taking a break between, taking a break from coding, and you're thinking about what you want to do, what drives you, and what's going to continue to drive you for the next week, for the next month, for the next 10 years. It really is nice to have that thought at the back of your mind, always ruminating, and especially as Alaskans, it's something good that you're doing for the state. So basically, I'm saying that to say this, that as Alaskans, as developers up here, I mean, we have this Alaskan mentality that we're special, but in a lot of ways we really are really special, and we have a lot of opportunities up here. And so there are a lot of reasons, hey Jamie, there are a lot of reasons up here to get extremely excited about developing in Alaska. And I really, the biggest thing that I want is to hear more of those reasons. I want to hear more of those reasons why people have come up here, why they've stayed up here, and why they enjoy their job as much as I do. So the last thing I wanted to do, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, I'm just going to check really quickly, but I did want to have, I wanted to get a little bit of feedback from all of you. So I did have those 3 questions. If anyone here wants to share, I'm just curious why you became a programmer, like how it all started, or why you love programming today. Something to think about. Maybe we'll come back to that one. But the other one, so what do you want out of the kind of the community? What is it in Alaska that, and so these are really things to consider as well, especially if you're going out and having conversations throughout the conference. These are the things I really want people talking about, is what they want, not necessarily out of Alaska Dev, but just out of a community of programmers in Alaska. What would make, what would set it apart from, working in your own, working in your office, working in your home office or for your company? What would really make that more of, from a tech standpoint, a more rewarding experience? And that's something I really want to hear about. And then finally, this is the 3rd question, what would an Alaska tech startup look like? So that's definitely something that people should kind of think about and keep in mind. And then also, the points I made about developing in rural Alaska, I think that that presents an incredible opportunity, and I really wish there'd be more dialogue in terms of that. So that's kind of where I was going to leave it. I had a few ideas about kind of talking about the pros and cons as well, and I think that's, just to conclude, that's the last aspect of the conversation that's missing, is as a programmer, what's good about being up here, what's bad about being up here, what are the opportunities and threats that come out of that. And so otherwise, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to tell you about how much I like being up here, how rewarding it's been to be involved in the tech community, and trying to find ways that I can give back and kind of provide for everyone else as well and work together. Thank you.